This is your Chargers linebacker, Daiyan Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Daiyan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. If this is your first time tuning in to the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Daiyan Wolkenstein, 19 days away from the NFL draft. It hasn't been too long, but we figured like now was a good time to kind of get the just around 2-week temperature of the fan base. Let's go live with a live show. Let's get everybody's feelings, because I know that a lot of people have had their opinions in terms of what are the Chargers going to do at 5? Should they trade down? Should they stay put? What are they going to do as far as to build this team out over the 3 days of the NFL draft? The hype is palpable in draft season as it is right now. So that's why Dan and I wanted to do a live show this morning. Daiyan Wolkenstein, before we kick everything off, how are you, sir?
I'm wonderful. It's Saturday morning. I got my bubbly. I'm doing intermittent fasting right now, so I can't eat until 10. So I got some sparkling water. If you've never had this orange cream bubbly, it's like a creamsicle. I'm telling you, hits all the right places. I'm doing great. Chargers fans, I know, are pumped for the next month. It's going to be hard to let these days go by, but it's going to go by so slow. But we're going to get there.
Yes, we're going to get there eventually. We're going to get there. I was just going to say this speaks more to the dichotomy of you and I, especially during the season. You've obviously been more optimistic of the bunch between the second of us. I'm the antithesis of you. But in terms of your selection of drinks this morning, I too so happen to have an orange can in my hand. However, it's definitely on the other side of the spectrum. That is, I went old school.
Cheers.
I'm doing rockstar recovery. So that's great.
Look, I did not sleep great last night. Lots of stuff happening in the Wolkenstein household. Cat's going crazy. Daughter wakes up early. So I'm running on fumes here. But we got Chargers fans in the chat going crazy. You know the deal, folks. We love doing these. We love engaging during live shows. If you have any topics, questions, ideas, predictions, things you'd like us to discuss, please put them in the chat. We'll do our best to weave those through. And honestly, I want to take a second and just thank the Chargers fans and thank the community that has kind of helped grow this show to what it is. And looking back, we're at year 5 now, Jake, and seeing how things have progressed and seeing the opportunities that have risen because of all of this and all of you. Thank you. All of the comments, all the feedback, all the reviews, all the subscriptions, all of it. It means the world to us, and we're just getting started. This is just the beginning, brick by brick, and it's all because of you. So, Jake, real quick, before we even get to any topics, so if you have kind of open floodgates, we can let people do whatever they want. At this point, let's get to some of these questions. There's a bunch. Okay, Anthony Navarro, by the way, Dan, all caps. Hi, all caps. I don't know what that means, but hello. Another Dan, third Dan here. I'll leave my question here since I'll be running around a bit this morning. Haha. Any update on J.K. Dobbins signing with us or any other rumors you've heard through the grapevine?
Outside of the MVS talks from Jeremy Fowler that broke in terms of the Chargers having interest in Martez Valdez-Scantling, it's been kind of quiet on the J.K. Dobbins front. The only teams that I knew that he interviewed with were the Chargers and the Chiefs. And then when the Chiefs ended up coming down and signing Clyde Edwards-Helaire, kind of put to rest that move for J.K. Dobbins, in my opinion. So this may be a situation with J.K. that they just may wait until the draft pans out to see if they ultimately end up bringing him on the roster. It could happen between now and then. Who knows? But there is a possibility now that we're 19 days away from the NFL draft that they may just say, hey, let's wait. Let's see how this pans out. Depending on how it goes, maybe we'll bring you in after.
Yeah, let's get to some of these questions real quick off the top. We have Fitness says, alt at 5. We had Trevor Sikkema on the show previously, and he kind of talked through the reasoning and rationale behind it. And there's a lot of reasons why it would work. And there's a lot of reasons why I think Chargers fans are probably in their feelings, hoping that they don't go that direction. All that to say, and I've thought about how, and Jake, you and I probably have thought about this separately, because there's a lot of pushback on the alt at 5 thing. And what I want to make clear, at least from my perspective, is we're talking about a top tier prospect at Joe Alt or a top tier prospect of Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison or Roma Dunze or whoever it is, right? And Trevor alluded to this a little bit, but we could all have preferences of who we want this team to go for, what we want this offense to look like, who we want them to select, what position, value, all of that. We could have a preference. But where I think a lot of fans miss me is when I hear them saying things like, oh, Joe Alt sucks, or he's not going to be a good right tackle, or that's a bad selection. Like, let's be real. Like, Joe Alt is probably going to be the best offensive tackle prospect you can go after now that Jim Harbaugh is your head coach. You could prefer the receiver and you could prefer the explosiveness. And I get all of that. But if they go that route and they go offensive tackle, you have to believe and trust in Ortiz and Harbaugh and that they're doing what they want to do for a reason.
Yeah, this is what's so good about the draft season. Again, we all get caught up in it. There's so much emotion flying around as it relates to it because the drama is just so good when it comes to the NFL draft. And especially from the Chargers standpoint and picking this high at 5. There's so many different avenues that they can go on. Hell, me being the biggest trade down advocate for the past 10 years, I'm even having to kind of resign myself to the fact that depending on how the board falls, especially now, you may have to just stick and pick at 5. And if it's a Marvin Harrison Jr. or if it is a Malik Neighbors that you end up selecting at 5, it's a wise decision. But it's just there are so many avenues that this Chargers team can go. And I get everybody's feelings on every standpoint in terms of, differences on Joe Alt being selected at 5, or if you trade down to 11 and then you end up taking an offensive tackle then. But again, this is why the NFL draft is so great. We had Jordan Reed on this show just about a month ago, and his whole stance was completely different on the offensive tackle at 5. He had the Chargers trading down to 11 and then selecting Brock Bowers with their first pick. That was his perspective at the time on how everything worked. We've had Brett Coleman on here definitely making the argument for tackles, whether it was at 5 or 11 again. And now Trevor, obviously, when we asked him at the very end of the show to shoot his shot who he thought it was going to be with the Chargers' first selection, he ended up selecting Roma Dunze. So again, here it is. Like everybody, especially in the broader spectrum of things, it's different from us from the standpoint of just focusing on what the Chargers are going to do. But this is where it's different in terms of, let's remember who the head coach is. Let's also remember that this is a brand new front office regime and someone who is very familiar with trading down, which the previous front office regime was not. So I get everybody's opinions on it. I totally respect everybody's opinions on it. And it could go several different ways. But at the end of the day, don't pigeonhole yourself into one scenario because I promise you may get disappointed. That's all I will say.
Yes, I agree with you. We're flooded with comments here, so let's try to go a little rapid fire here. And we have a lot of topics to discuss. We want to kind of discuss some of the forgotten gems of this draft class. We'll talk about some scenarios of wide receiver, offensive tackle. We'll talk about like the philosophies of Batman and Robin as you see on the screen. Jake, the Guilty as Charged guys are here. Alex Insdorf gives his salute. Guilty as Charged says, good morning, fellas. Hope all is well. Right back at you. We have folks in here saying we should just draft a long snapper at 5, which would make everybody's life feel unanimously united, which would be great. Bolted Chad says where did it go? I lost it. There it is. Not an MVS fan, he says. Just draft Neighbors if you want speed. Now, I'm sure, and people have heard this discussion a million times about like what the Chargers' options are at 5 and what the fit wants to be at 5. Jake, I think everyone's talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. and Blake Neighbors for good reason. But there's another receiver who many are very high on who I feel like is kind of just cruising under the radar a little bit. Are we sleeping on Rome Odunze?
No. I mean, I could understand why he's being pushed under the table a little bit just from the standpoint of when you're talking about where the Chargers are drafting. Rome Odunze definitely isn't slipping out of the top 10. I'll tell you that much. But Rome Odunze is, you've seen so many people talk about where they rank him in terms of this big three. DJ still has Odunze as his number 2 wide receiver behind Marvin Harrison Jr. And when you think about this roster as it looks right now, when free agency first kicked off, before Keenan Allen was traded, and when Mike Williams had been let go, you could have conceivably said that Neighbors was the fit. That was the juice that was missing. That was the speed and explosiveness that the Chargers missed on in drafting in 2023. Now that Keenan's not on this roster, obviously all 3 of these guys could fit a need for the Chargers. But Harrison and Odunze are very similar in terms of their skill set, what they do. Obviously, one's had more consistency and success and more attention paid to him than the other, and for good reason. But if the Chargers ended up selecting Odunze at 5, I know that people would definitely have questions about it, but I'll just keep it as simple as this. Rattle off the entire wide receiver room for the Chargers right now.
Oh, boy.
And tell me that Odunze could not be that guy. And I'm just going to leave it as simple as that. And I could make the exact same question for Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors. But don't forget about Rome Odunze. That's all I will say.
Lots of people talking about the left tackle, right tackle thing. So let's kind of get to that here for a sec. Jake Lauster Bruin, left tackle prospect, though, referring to Joe Alt, still doesn't make the interior any better, not moving Pipkins to guard either. So I think we've seen people talk about, and there's reports that Joe Alt, while he's a stud left tackle, right, he's the anchor, he could be a future, bona fide, whatever. But there's reports that say that he didn't look as comfortable at the right side. Then there were a bunch of conflicting reports basically seeing that and saying, like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm paraphrasing. And, like, that's not true. There's history that tells you that moving from left to right is not a guarantee. It's not easy, which people in chat are talking about as well. For Joe Alt specifically, because I think, honestly, if they're going to take a tackle at 5, it's probably him. Does that concern you? Like, do we really know? Or is it all speculation at this point?
I mean, like you said, there's history that's shown that there are certain tackles that can make the transition from left to right and be successful. However, there's plenty of cases to show that that's not the case and it doesn't end up panning out that way. I think that's why, for me personally, if the Chargers ultimately ended up selecting tackle with their first round selection, trading back, getting Talise Fuaga or JC Latham, just more of a natural fit either at guard, and you play him, Fuaga at guard next to Pipkins for a year. You let go of Trey Pipkins, then you eventually move Fuaga over to right tackle because he has the skill set to do that. Or you pick JC Latham, who consensus is the best right tackle in this class. I think that would be the better move to go to personally, so you don't have that possible risk and repeating history all over with itself. And I get everything on Joe Alt. Again, as you said, Dan, not knocking Joe Alt, the player. If it was me and offensive tackle was going to be the target for the Chargers in the first round, that's how I would go about selecting it.
Yeah. Let's get to some of these comments and questions here. Charlie Sinclair, friend of the show. What would be acceptable trade down compensation? Now, you've seen so many trade down scenarios. I saw an interesting one from Matt Money Smith. I heard an episode that he did where he was having Arizona basically trading back, then trading back up, and essentially trading with Arizona. You get their 1, and then you get a 2 and a 3. So essentially you end up getting 2 1s, 2 2s, a 1, 2 2s, 2 3s, and 2 4s for this year. Like, that's a pretty good assortment of picks as your first year for Joe Ortiz. You've seen the 11 and 23 and possibly a 2025 first round pick for Minnesota. I think, honestly, if the Chargers get 2 first round picks, they're probably going to do it. But again, I think, and Jake, you and I talked about this a couple days ago. I think it was offline, maybe it was online. Gut feeling. And I don't necessarily think that the Chargers are like 100% trading down. But in my opinion, I think the only reason they don't trade down, like I think the only like timeout trump card is MHJ. I think after that, I think everything on the table and they could be bought. So
absolutely.
Acceptable trade for you. If you're Joe Ortiz and a team calls you, what's the minimum?
I obviously the Minnesota one is just too enticing. I look at that and it's more from the standpoint of that makes the most sense in terms of trade down partners, in terms of the capital that you want, that you'd be looking for. The Giants, in terms of just trading back one spot, you obviously have some competition there that's going to battle Minnesota. Your trade package isn't going to be nearly as lucrative to trade down one spot, but in terms of who the Chargers may be targeting to say, hey, we could just move back one spot, pick up a couple extra draft picks and still end up getting our guy. The Raiders and the Broncos, I understand why you could say, okay, let's fleece someone in our division. But if it means them getting one of these top 4 quarterbacks, no. And I just say that because not only are interdivision trades extremely rare in the NFL draft, but if this was for any other player than a quarterback, why would you want to be helping someone in your division in that circumstance to get that? I just don't see that happening. So
especially that quarterback.
Yes. I mean, who knows what we're going to be talking about and what order they're going to be going off the board. But that is where everything draws to Minnesota. Now, Minnesota is interesting because they obviously have limited draft capital beyond this first round. They don't have a second round pick in 2023. So your best shot that you could try to work to get is obviously if you were to trade back to 11, you get 11, 23, and you could push for a 2025 first round pick. Probably would have to settle for their third round pick in 2025. But at the very least, if you were to end up getting 11 and 23, you could be putting yourself in some really good position because this team obviously has so many holes to fill on this roster that regardless of whether we're talking about one of the blue chip receivers at 5 or you trade back to 11, you go offensive tackle, you could go the first corner off the board. You could still end up getting a really solid wide receiver for your team with that 23rd pick. So again, a lot of different directions for them to go, but I still think Minnesota makes the most sense in terms of capital and what you could get back and as well as your trade partners.
Agreed. Nick Semerkoff, this is the same type of thing that we got to be careful here. He sucked at the combine on the right side. I think we've all seen the one report that has said that has given that rumor. But is that what we're all as a fan base hanging our hats on? Is one guy who says that he didn't look good on the right side where other people have said he looked fine? And the teams themselves, you've heard nothing. I've heard nothing about that other than that one account that said it. So all I'm saying is be careful putting all of your stock into a decision based off one person giving their feedback. And that one person isn't an NFL team. I just be careful. Be careful. Guilty as charged earlier asked a question. They asked, what's your gut feeling for what they do at 5? Jake, I'll let you go first. End of the day, all options on the table. What happens at 5?
This is, again, weird coming from the trade down advocate, but I'm hoping that Arizona trades out of 4. I really am. Because to get a player like Marvin Harrison Jr., when many others were so pissed about how that final week of the NFL season ended with Arizona that essentially locked them into the number 4 position.
By the way, guys, you should have heard Jake on that phone.
I was very upset. I was very upset.
We had to hang up for a bit. I had to give Jake some breaths to compose himself, as I did, to be honest.
Yes. But if after all of that happens and you could still be in a position to get Marvin Harrison Jr. God, I mean, I'm not saying that that's what my gut is saying that would end up happening at 5, but it'd be hard pressed for this coaching staff and this front office to make a different decision if he's on the board. Again, we've read interviews with Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter talking about when they played Marvin Harrison Jr. at Ohio State, the attention that they had to put to him because of how good of a playmaker he is. I always kind of go back to that whole thing of, perception as far as why would you want to possibly play against this guy when you could have the opportunity to have him? I mean,
Fair.
That would just be such a huge benefit for this team. However, you look at Joe Ortiz and everything that we were so hyped about him when he came to this office is because he's got a track record in Baltimore for 20 plus years of being in a wheeling dealing position. And for this Chargers team in particular, especially from the standpoint of Keenan Allen no longer being here and the rest of the other holes that you have to fill in the roster, trading down just is so enticing. So if it's for the right package and Marvin Harrison Jr. is not on the board at 5, I say that's the way to go.
Yeah, if I'm going, and I think I posted this a couple days ago, but my gut says it's either Marvin Harrison Jr. or a trade down. I think those are the only two options. I just can't see them. I mean, I would love, it would be so climactic for me to see the Chargers on the clock. Marvin Harrison is or is not on the board, and the Chargers select Malik Neighbors. That would be dream come true for me. Shock me, honestly, because again, I think given what I know about this team and what I know about the philosophy and Greg Roman and Ortiz and Harbaugh, seems like Harrison is that guy for them. The style, the archetype, the pedigree, the pro readiness. But Malik Neighbors would just be the most fun first round pick that I've seen the Chargers make. The most explosive first round pick I've ever seen the Chargers make, period. Since LT, if I'm being honest. On offense, anyways. You could say Derwin James with defense, but on offense. But I just don't know if the Chargers are that high on him as I am. So I'm going to so again, that's why I go back. I think it's Marvin Harrison Jr. or trade down to answer the question. One kind of way to look at this, and I've seen a few people start to do this, and I think it's an interesting exercise, is to kind of go through different scenarios, right? So I wanted to kind of just give this to Chargers fans, and Jake, you and I can kind of talk about this, and in the comments, let us know what you would rather do. You have the option. You've heard so many people talk about the depth and the excellence of the wide receiver class and the tackle class, right? I think the wide receiver class is definitely deeper, far deeper than the tackle class in terms of talent you can get in day 2. So I ask you this. If you had to pair a tackle and a wide receiver in rounds 1 and 2, and that's the way the Chargers were going to go, which route are you going to go for? You have either, let's just say Joe Alt, or pick whoever you want at tackle, paired with a second round receiver. That could be maybe A.D. Mitchell, who again, that's my dream in the second round. I don't know if he's going to make it that far, but a receiver like A.D. Mitchell, maybe it's a Roman Wilson, Xavier Legette. You can do the Florida State guy. There's a bunch of guys you can go. So that route, 2 starting caliber studs, in my opinion, or you go to the top tier blue chip receiver, Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison, Odunze, and who else?
This is a broad yet pigeonholed question for me, because I would actually go door number 3.
I know you would, but door number 3 means you're not getting a tackle.
Yes, but it doesn't mean I'm not addressing the offensive line. If it was
tackle not a need, is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that tackle is. In my brain right now, center is a bigger need than a tackle. That's how my brain is operating. Okay. However, I really liked Field Yates's mock draft because I felt that this kind of pants this question, especially with some of the players you're bringing up. When he had the Chargers trading back with Minnesota to 11, and he had them taking J.C. Latham at 11, A.D. Mitchell at 23, and then turn right back around in the second round and taking Zach Frazier from West Virginia. I was like, oh, yo, somebody's cooking with gas right here. The other way I see this playing out is my whole notion, Dan, and you know this cornerback class, and you know how much the Chargers need help in the defensive backfield. To me, you cannot come out of day 2 and not have one of your selections be a cornerback.
Agreed. I agree.
And ideally, I would think that target has to be at 37. Has to be there. So if
we're
you're
not
talking about
trade down, yeah.
Yes. So if you're talking about ideal pairings, I would probably say I would lean towards the Fuaga or Latham. This would come down in a trade down scenario, obviously. You're out of the big 3 in that circumstance in terms of wide receivers. Brian Thomas Jr. is going to go somewhere in the teens, so A.D. Mitchell would probably be where you'd have to go in with that second round pick.
If he's in there, but yeah.
If he's, I would think that A.D. Mitchell would still be there at 23, less so for Brian.
Sorry, I think it's 37. I'm sorry. Yeah.
And then 37, I would come back around and get my corner. To me, that would be a great use of draft capital if you were able to make that trade with Minnesota. And in terms of look at the needs filled in that circumstance. And again, I'm very bullish on this center class. I love this center class. So if you were to tell me that you could just, with your first 3 picks, 2 of them being in the first round, be Latham, A.D. Mitchell, let's just say Sandra still for the argument at 37. And then you come back maybe in round 3 or one of your 2 fourth round picks and you end up taking one of the centers off that class. You've done a good job. that to me already looks good. Just saying that out loud, if that was a possibility.
Agreed. There was someone here asking, I can't find it because I'm lost in all the, there it is. Luis asked it. MHJ is available. Vikings offer you 11 and then 2 2025 picks, first and second. 1, they don't have a second round pick because I learned that the hard way because I messed that up a week or 2 ago. I don't think the Chargers do. Even if they did, I don't think they do it. I don't think that's enough. Especially if quarterbacks go 1 through 4. Or hell, either way, honestly, it doesn't matter. Because personally, I think that the stock for a team wanting to go up to get Marvin Harrison Jr. and JJ McCarthy should be the same. Now, will it be? I don't know. But it should be the same. Like, nobody can tell you that Marvin Harrison Jr. isn't a better prospect than JJ McCarthy. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is also more of a sure thing. I know the quarterback tax. I get it. But, like, let's just put that aside for a second. Like, come on.
The premium for quarterbacks when it comes to the NFL draft is always outrageous.
But should it be? But like, and I said this like a month ago or however long ago, like I just, until I see Arizona trade out of that for a team to come out for a quarterback, I just don't think this wide receiver class is worthy of going 1 through 4. Like, I wouldn't. So I'm kind of just like, until I see it, I'm not going to believe it. Call it like me trying to brace and not allow myself to get emotionally invested in Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't know. I've seen this story happen, and I've been burned so many times of, oh, Mac Jones, he's going to go so high. Oh, Zach Will, like, no, like they'll go, but they're not going to go to the cost. Like, these teams aren't stupid. So, I should say some are, maybe, but until it happens, I mean, hey, if it does and Jim Harbaugh makes that magic out of the hat, I will gladly say I'm wrong.
MHJ is the outlier to trading down. To me, you don't trade down if he's on the board. It doesn't matter what the package is.
I agree. Eddie Saldana says 3 weeks away from the NFL draft. Let's let the anxious times begin. Oh,
there's plenty of that going around.
Yep. Graham Barton, Dan Deach says, do you see Graham Barton being there in the second round? If they go wide receiver the first?
Man, this offensive line class in general, and we talked to Jordan Reed about this. you may break the record this year for offensive linemen being taken in the first round, which is just insane. And it's indicative how strong this class is. And you have so many situations like with Graham Barton, because he's essentially played so many different positions along the offensive line during his career. Some people believe that he's just, immediate interior offensive line fit, or that he could immediately go into center and do it because he's got the athleticism, he's got the physical attributes that fit that mold. And you line that up with the rest of the tackles and centers in this class. I mean, Dan, I still think it's an over/under of 2.5 centers that could be drafted in the first round. I mean, it's insane how many offensive linemen we may be talking by the time that the first round is over, of how many that could be off the board.
Yeah. So I'm putting up 2 comments here because I think this is like essentially the rub of Chargers fans right now. Tony says, I'm sick of this trade down bullshit and take the star receiver at 5 for Justin Herbert's sake. The team owes Justin the best available. Okay, there's that side of the coin. And then there's Dustin. He has gotten beaten up. He has no time to throw. Herbert can make plays to guys like Guyton and T. Billy. He needs alignment. So if we pause, neither of these options are bad. Neither of these options are wrong. They need both. So if the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh elect to go the protect Justin at all costs, run the rock, alleviate some of the pressure, allow him to go over the top later, build this thing in the long run, take the tackle now, you can get receivers later. That's not the wrong decision. It's just a different decision. It's a different approach. If they decide to go, screw it, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Dunze, they're too good to pass up. We'll figure out the tackle later. It's not a wrong decision. That's a fun decision for sure, but it's more risk for sure. You can't argue otherwise. That's the rub of Chargers fans right now. And I don't really think it has to do with trading down. I think it's just giving him more weapons or protecting him. And if you're looking at a way to do both, I think that's where things get interesting. And that's why the trade back stuff makes sense.
Again, I'm going to just, put my trading advocate cap on. You can't think of it as the old regime anymore. I think we're still too in our heads about it because we haven't seen Joe Ortiz actually execute something like this for this Chargers yet. And yes, I still stand by that if it's Marvin Harrison Jr. on the board at 5, that you do not trade out of that pick, that you make that selection. However, as we said when we opened the show, we have to put into account who is the head coach of this team now. What is it that he installs? I will also make the argument that good coaching trumps a lot of deficiencies in the NFL. How is it that the Chiefs were able to move on from their star wide receiver and win the Super Bowl the very next year? How is it that they were able to do what they did this past season when arguably it was the worst weapons that Patrick Mahomes had to throw to outside of Travis Kelce, and they still won the Super Bowl? That's what actually has me more intrigued as it relates to this Chargers team, because in the macro sense, hell, look at what Ben Herbert was talking about during his press conference earlier this week. Look at what this Chargers coaching staff has been built up to. Good coaching can trump bad play and can make players that may seem mediocre better, whether it's off of scheme, system, training. I've said this to Dan. Whoever it is that the Chargers end up selecting at center, they get to learn second-handedly from Nick Hardwick.
Mm-hmm.
That's a rad thought. That is awesome to think about. And the rest of this coaching staff, the way it's been built out on both sides of the ball, like, to me, you're going to see more. I'll phrase it like this. Should injuries occur to whatever position it is, and I'm not trying to jinx anything, we just know that that's just part of the NFL, but I think that you're going to see a much less drop-off from a first-string guy to a second-string guy to a third-string guy than we have traditionally seen in the past. And that is due to front office decisions, and that is due to coaching. Because for the longest time, the Chargers had talent on on paper, but they were just way too top heavy. They didn't have any depth. Building out depth and building those key positions that we know that ultimately relies around Justin Herbert, those to me are the key goals in this draft. And that's why there's so much intrigue to see how Joe Ortiz and Jim Harbaugh are going to carry this thing out.
I'm with you. Jake, let's get to some of these questions. This might be a little bit of an eye chart, but Joseph DiMartini asked, what do you think we can get if we trade down in the second round? So this would probably be my ideal if they could just take the blue chip first, trade down later. A bit of an eye chart. We're looking at the trade value chart again. We don't know how this is going to actually play out. Some teams reach a little bit, whatever. But roughly, Chargers pick 37 worth 530. So let's say they trade back with a team. Let's say they trade with, I don't know, let's go Houston. Houston's down here at pick number 59. That's a delta of 210 points. So they can trade down 210. Could probably net them an additional third round pick. Or if you want to get crazy, you can go and get probably a fourth, a fifth, and next year's probably third, next year's second, maybe. So you're probably getting an extra third or maybe a fourth and a fifth and maybe a late round one. Would you do it?
Yeah, let's just say if this was a situation where you stayed put and you selected Marvin Harrison Jr. at 5, I absolutely think trading out of 37 is a huge possibility. Get more draft capital because it's tough to pass up on Marvin Harrison, but you still have so many holes to fill. 37 becomes a prime spot to trade down. And you could already figure that that there is going to be a run on wide receivers at the beginning of the second round. Let's just say because Carolina doesn't have a first round pick, that they're going to go out and get Bryce Young another weapon. If New England ends up taking a quarterback at 3, which a lot of people predict, they still need another weapon for their young quarterback. So they're most likely taking a wide receiver before the Chargers select at 37. So there's going to be a run on wide receivers that early part of the second round. That's where this whole risk reward thing comes into play in terms of when do you draft one? Who's still going to be on the board if you happen to pass one up in the first round? 37, is it there? Is it not there? Depending on who the Chargers have and select in the first round, 37 is a prime trade down candidate given who's going to be coming off the board at that standpoint.
Yeah, I'm with you. Louds of Bruin, worst case scenario, Marvin Harrison Jr. is drafted by the Pats, Neighbors by the Cards, and Chargers have to stick and pick. Again, if that worst case scenario were to occur, I don't think Roma Dunze is oh man.
It's not a consolation prize. Don't look at it like that. I get it from the standpoint of what Marvin Harrison Jr. is, but I will say that question that I said 20 minutes ago. This Chargers wide receiver room right now, tell me if you don't believe that Roma Dunze can be that guy in that locker room right now.
Mm-hmm. Is one lineman going to make the offensive line good? Bozeman is a downgrade in pass protection from Linsley alone. Okay, maybe, but Linsley compared to who was playing last year at center, upgrade. Coaching staff, upgrade. Nick Hardwick, upgrade. Scheme,
familiarity,
upgrade. Greg Roman, upgrade. Add on top of that, a right tackle? Yeah, absolutely.
You're probably looking to draft your center of the future in this draft as well. Yes. Yeah, totally. Because it's just a 1-year deal.
Yep. Let's see. Let's get to some more of these questions here. We've got Harrison saying bolt up. Good coaching trumps all. Let's see. Numbers don't lie. Look at Neighbors' collegiate stats. Almost identical to Marvin Harrison Jr., but he's explosive. True. Although over the career, no. Marvin Harrison Jr. much higher. Last year, Neighbors is better. But again, Harrison Jr. saw double teams the entire freaking season. So, like, it's different. They're just different. Let's get to some of these. Young West says, I hate to say it, but I have a feeling they are trading back no matter what at 5.
Could totally happen. I've said this to Dan because me being the devout trade advocate that I am, I said this to him weeks ago when we were talking about this type of situation. the football gods are a fickle bitch because I have been asking for a trade down for 10 years. 10 years. And now it's in a situation where possibly Marvin Harrison Jr. could be on the board. The Chargers could select Malik Neighbors. And I will say this. If the Chargers ultimately end up trading out of 5, whatever situation it is, if they ultimately end up making that move, and let's just say hypothetically they go to 11, the amount of emotion that we are feeling right now from just thinking about the idea that Marvin Harrison Jr. could be on this team, the amount of stress that will be going through the Chargers fan base if they have to wait an additional 6 picks to see who's still going to be on the board and for them to ultimately make that selection at 11. Because now in your mind, if you think that the Chargers are going to trade down no matter what, if that's including Marvin Harrison Jr., you have to think, oh my God, we just walked out of a position where we could have drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. What the hell are we going to do at 11? And the tension's going to be so palpable during that period of time because, inner me is being like, yay, we finally did a trade down, but also, oh shit. Okay, now it really starts.
Jose, what if the coaches make Quentin Johnston into a top 10 receiver? Do we really need a wide receiver at 5? We talked about this a little bit, not necessarily this bullish about Quentin Johnston, but a lot of this selection depends on the faith they have in the current staff. The current room. Do they think Quentin Johnston can be that guy? Do they see enough in him and believe that they can make him into who the Chargers thought they were getting? Do they believe that Josh Palmer can be their long-term wide receiver too? We don't know. If they do believe both of those things, then they're not going receiver in round 1 because they can fill out the bottom of the wide receiver depth chart later on and get blue chip talent later. If they don't, the chances are up. Do you think that he could be a top 10 receiver?
I think it's way too early to even start fathoming about something like that. Honestly, the sample size on Quentin Johnston in his rookie year was not the best. And I think part of that was due to his own development as also hand in hand with that from the coaching priorities on him. Now, when he was selected, obviously the Chargers needed a wide receiver in that draft last year because you have to start thinking about the future. And for the Chargers going all in the way they did with the contracts on Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, fast forward, we're now in this position where the Chargers could honestly double dip at wide receiver in this draft because you need to fill it out. We know Josh Palmer only has 1 more year left on his deal. What could this wide receiver room possibly look like a year from now? Have no idea. No idea. So I think part of the handcuffs that what kind of held Quentin Johnston back last year, again, was his own personal development. I think when Mike Williams went down in week 3 last year, we all expected a huge acceleration to Quentin Johnston. And for whatever reason, he wasn't targeted that often. He wasn't utilized often. He probably wasn't utilized properly the way that he should have been in that offense. And that hindered him. Now you're talking about Kellen Moore's offense now translating to what Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh want to run. I don't see that as a scenario that could land Quentin Johnston as a top 10 wide receiver. Just thinking in my head as far as how that scheme wants to be run. Is that going to open up some opportunities for Quentin Johnston? Sure, it will be. And I would think that with his rookie season under his belt and a lot of the hills that he had to overcome coming into this year, I would hope that he's going to end up turning into a better wide receiver in year 2. But it's much too early to start thinking about that in terms of top 10 levels and just a short year of a turnaround, especially in a new offense.
Young West says it's all Jake's fault if we trade back. LOL. Just kidding. We love you. Hey, if they trade back, Jake's will be happy. Either way, that's fine.
For like 30 seconds, I'm going to. Like traditionally, I could have been like elated that the Chargers traded down. And you
because
could
there wasn't
not,
the blue chip guy.
Yeah.
Because we're not at 5. Yeah.
And you couldn't have wiped the smile off my face. You couldn't even taken a sandblaster to it if that was the case. Now it's going to be like ear to ear for 20 seconds. Because then you're going to watch the board fall, and most likely your top 3 wide receivers are going to be gone. So then it's really going to come down to that question: whoever you take at 11, you just keep in mind that you possibly just passed up Marvin Harrison Jr. if he was still on the board at 5, and that's the conundrum that's going on.
Yes, Jake, we got to talk about some forgotten gems. We also got to pay the bills.
Yes.
For folks who are in the chat who have not done so, while Jake's doing our quick ad read and making money for our families, do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe. Do it right now. Jake's about to start talking about our friends. One quick like, subscribe, helps out a ton. Leave a review, whatever it is. Jake, let's talk about our friends over at...
Well, as always, want to tell everybody about the easiest way to get into some of the sports action. It's Underdog Fantasy and their pick'em game. Just pick higher or lower on your favorite or least favorite players, and you can win up to 20 times your money in a single night. Underdog keeps it super simple with their easy-to-use website and mobile apps. Just pick between 2 and 5 players to fill out your pick'em entry. Get every pick right and take home some cold, hard cash. Use the promo code UNLEASHED and get your first deposit doubled up to $500 by Underdog. Going over to Underdog Fantasy today and let them know that Chargers Unleashed sent you.
So much talk, and I want to kind of get to this because this is some of the fun stuff for us. So much talk is about like what to do at 5 and what to do later in round 1 if they trade back. And so little is being talked about like the other crazy studs who I feel like are going to go unforgotten, and no one's really talked about it because everyone's so obsessed with 5 and trading back and taking a tackle or DD receiver and what the compensate like. So in the chat, let us know some of your guys. We'll go through some of ours here in a sec. But Jake, off the top, we talked to Trevor, and I brought up the idea of separation for wide receivers and who are some of the guys that I think, or he thought, were some of the best separators in this class. And he was going through the names, and he didn't say Roman Wilson. He's going through percentiles. I said, "Oh, what about Roman Wilson?" And he's like, "Oh, let me go check on Roman Wilson." And I'm paraphrasing, but he said, "Holy shit! Yep, Roman Wilson." I think it was like 94th percentile separation, 90-something percentile in man coverage. You are a Los Angeles Charger, he says.
Yes.
Roman Wilson's one. Xavier Legette's another one. Graham Barton's another one. Jerrion Jones, both Jones, honestly. The corners. You got Sandra still. People talk about a ton. Renardo Green is another one that I love. You got Max Melton, another one. Blake Corum. There are so many gems in this class, so many positions. Edgerrin Cooper. Folks in the chat, tell us some of yours. Jake, who are some of the other guys? We just haven't talked about these enough because everyone's talking about something else.
Because we're all caught up in the first round of everything, obviously, and Dan and I will dive into this more because we've talked about we've given our top prospect rankings on linebacker, on running back. Center position is coming next for that. Linebacker is an interesting spot because coverage linebackers in this class are scarce. And for what Jesse Minter wants to do in this defense, there's maybe 4 or 5 guys that you could say fit this bill. And I know that when we're talking about all the priorities, you look at the linebacker room as it stands right now, the Chargers moved off of Kenneth Murray. They moved off of Eric Kendricks. So Daiyan Henley comes into some starter reps. You bring back Denzel Perryman and Dye, both on 1-year deals. You have Nick Neiman to round that room out. That's not enough. Not in Jesse Minter's defense, not in year 1. So whether we're talking about an Edgerrin Cooper or a Peyton Wilson or a Cedric Gray, when are these guys going to be prioritized? Because again, if we're talking coverage, which is predicated on what Jesse Minter wants his linebackers to do, there's few guys in the linebacker class. And again, this linebacker class is not that strong in general, but especially when it's tailored to what Jesse Minter wants his linebackers to do, it becomes even a smaller boat for you to find guys in that realm. I think when we're talking about corners, Dan, obviously everything is just going immediately towards the rise of Mike Sanders right now because his draft stock is just absolutely rocketed. The familiarity in Michigan, what he was doing in Jency Minter's defense, it just all makes too much sense. If the Chargers don't go corner with their second round pick, even though I highly advise not doing that, if they did go that route, Cam Hart and oh my gosh, I'm all of a sudden just having just a complete blank. Kyrie Jackson from Oregon.
Yep.
Love
Kamari Lassiter too.
Lassiter, I'll be interested to see where he ends up going. Just from there's been such a huge.
I know.
It feels like forever ago that we were talking about Kool-Aid McKinstry as CB1 in
Another
this class.
one. Yeah.
Because, he obviously has dealt with his foot injury and, wasn't able to go to the combine and train. And even before he ended up having surgery on his foot injury, he still ended up running a 4.4, which was still impressive in its own right. But I feel like this whole cornerback, like at the top part of the rankings, has dramatically shifted. For the longest time, I believed that Nate Wiggins was my CB1. Things have changed. He hasn't dropped that far because I still think he's a stud. But then I've had to watch the rise of Quinyon Mitchell, who I thought would have been just a perfect get for the Chargers at 37. And now I know that that's not going to happen because he has just absolutely destroyed the testing process going all the way back to the Senior Bowl. And he is phenomenal. And some people now believe that he is CB1. Terrion Arnold is up there as well. Where is he going to last? Some people believe he is the CB1 of this class. Others believe he's CB3. So it's going to be so
honestly, Elijah Jones is a name no one's talking about. That dude from Boston College, top man coverage grade among all corners this past season. Third lowest pass rating allowed. No one's talking because he's not around one corner, not around two corner. I don't know, the Bullard, the safety from Georgia. You'll be sick. Javondre Sweat. I saw someone here say he'd be great in coverage. There's so many great guys. And I think it's easy to just focus on all or nothing, right? If they don't take Marvin Harrison Jr., draft sucks, throw it in the trash. If they get a tackle in round one, I'm over it. You gotta. There are 7 rounds. And this is somewhat of a rebuild.
As of right now, the Chargers have 9 picks, which is 2 more than they had over the past 10 years of drafting in 7 rounds.
Yep.
Well, I take that back. I take that back because maybe I feel that way because in the off chances that the Chargers gained an extra 3rd round pick, it just so happened to fall in the 3rd round. And with Tom Telesco's history in the 3rd round, we know how that played out.
Yes. So. Yeah. DXL, is Wiggins really only 173 pounds? He was the combine under the weather. I think I saw somebody else talk about this too.
He put on some size. Yes.
Yeah. So no, he's probably going to be I'm going to guess probably high 180s by the time the by the time a team selects him. Let's see. Got about 5 minutes left here. Maybe Jake for this last 5 minutes. Is there any specific topic you want to go through, or shall we just go rapid fire?
Let's go rapid fire, man. Let's go rapid fire.
Joseph DiMartini, Jonah Ellis.
I love Jonah Ellis. I love Jonah Ellis. And edge is an interesting spot because especially now that you've brought back Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, and obviously you have Tuli going into his 2nd year, you're still going to need to prioritize edge at some point. God, if there was a universe, Dan, where honestly, if Braden Fisk was there at 37, holy crap. You just talk about a guy who has a motor for days, just plays like it's his last snap that he's ever going to play. And if you could tell me that that was going to be your edge duo of the future in having Fisk and Tuli, I've talked about so many times how much I love Latu in this class. And if you were to pair Latu and Tuli to be your edge duo of the future, that was probably more realistic when Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack were a possibility to not be on this team. But again, we have to think about it. even with these restructures and even with them coming back, they're only going to be here for 1 year. So are you going to prioritize them in this draft, or are you going to roll into this draft with the same trio that you had last year? Pray that they stay healthy and then eventually prioritize edge next year high in the draft. It's definitely a possibility, but I think in terms of what Joe Ortiz is known for and building out depth, I think he's going to have to address that position at some point.
Charlie Sinclair, $5 donation. You're the best, man. Thank you. End of the day, we all have our preferences, but we all wanted Jim Harbaugh. Harbaugh is going to make the best decision that helps this team win in 2024, wide receiver or trade. Well said. Very well said. We all wanted Jim Harbaugh, and now that we got Jim Harbaugh, it's not the time to start questioning everything he does. Like, he's succeeded everywhere he's been. Let's let him kind of take the rock for a bit, see where he leads us. Brett McCall, what type of quarterback does this new system need? Is it more of a safety-led system? Well, I can tell you this much. Sure as hell need a lockdown CB1 that can play man-to-man press.
How about it can tackle?
Or that, and that.
You want you better have somebody that's going to be physical in that backfield. You need that.
Yep.
You need that.
Yeah, I mean, they had Sanders still. They had the other corner. That's going to be round one talent next year. Like, the Chargers don't have that. Their best corner right now is Asante Samuel Jr. and an unproven Christian Fulton, who has, like, the traits you like to see, but needs a new start. I'll be kind there.
Christian Fulton, 25 years old, in a new opportunity for him. Remember, he turned down less money from other teams to join the Chargers as a possible reclamation project. I love the intrigue surrounding that.
Totally.
But it does not take away the priority that the Chargers need to put on selecting a corner in this draft.
Two, probably, at least. They probably need a slot corner, need an outside corner. And the good news is there's a bunch in this draft that they can go for. Aaron Adams asks, how much stock do you all put into neighbors house hunting in LA? Jake, do you see that?
I saw that. I didn't know if that was actual. Like, was he just standing in a buddy's backyard, or was he actually house hunting?
I don't know. I think I saw some people talk about like the realtor or something was there.
I saw people tweeting it all over the place that he's hunting for real estate. Like, you'd have to be pretty indicative of a team selecting you in Los Angeles. Obviously, there's only two possibilities that you'd be hunting for real estate there.
Yep.
And I don't believe it's going to be the Rams that's selecting him. So that means that the Chargers know right now that who's going to be off the board 1, 2, 3, 4 for them to say, Malik, hey, yeah, why don't you go get yourself some, nice property in South County or something like that, or whatever the hell it is. I don't know about that. I look, Dan, I always concede to you because you are the advocate of Malik Neighbors joining this team. But
yeah, I don't see anything. It's not anything. No. I mean, you're out in LA visiting the Chargers and go look at like what could be, sure. But there's no way that he or the team know that they're selecting him. Even if he is available. No idea. Jake, we're rounding out here. Envy Talent says, what is the most critical move the Chargers made to you? Also, if you could rank the Chargers, where would you put them in the AFC? Thanks for the content. Thank you, Envy Talent.
It's I think when you look at it, it's a pair of moves, honestly, because you now look at the identity that the Chargers want to have with Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman, and going out and getting Gus Edwards and Will Dissly, I think is the first step in taking their plan where they want to go with it. The blocking tight end room for the Chargers has been an absolute mess and a disaster and basically non-existent for the better part of the last 4 years. Outside of Steven Anderson, who wasn't used enough, was probably your best blocking tight end that you had on this roster for a period of time. But going out and getting Will Dissly, I think taking a nice flare on Hayden Hurst to come in as a pass-catching option, and then going out and getting Gus Edwards. So the familiarity aspects and the notion and the scheme of what you want to accomplish with this offense already right there. To me, people might not put that up there with like some huge ass sexy moves when we're talking about just general free agency signings. But this is Harbaugh and Greg Roman figuring out what they want to do. And like Harbaugh said during his introductory press conference, they want to revitalize the run game of this team. That's two ways to do it. You obviously have more work to do. That's just not going to be the only moves that are done to help it out, but that's a good start.
Yeah, and this is why I love these live shows, because it helps with perspective. It helps maybe see around corners that maybe didn't think about. The most critical move for the Chargers has been Jim Harbaugh. Like, no question. Like, there's a tiered answer here. Like, obviously, Jim Harbaugh's at the top. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts. Below that, in my opinion, we haven't seen it yet, Jesse Minter is next on that list. Probably next on that list is probably Ben Herbert. Probably Ben Herbert. But if we're talking solely player acquisition, I think to me, it was Will Dissly. It's not because of like the sexy stats and all that jazz, but it showed, which we shouldn't have ever questioned this, but it showed the Chargers recognizing and going after what was their biggest weakness, in my opinion, was blocking for both running and passing downs. And going out and targeting a guy who is top 2, top 3 at both, that was big to me. Not only are you, because, they could say, oh, we have Greg Roman, we have a new scheme, the scheme works, and we'll fill it out, and we'll make our guys, and we'll develop them. No, like they went out and got a guy who is good at what they do already to help kind of build it out. So I would say that one if it was me. Let's see. Are we going to sign J.K. Dobbins? I don't think it's going to happen now. I don't know why it would happen now, honestly. It would have happened already if it was going to happen now. I could be wrong, but
I lean toward it again. We're talking about 19 days before the NFL draft. I still think that even with the running back room that you currently have, that the Chargers are going to prioritize running back at some point. You have to. JK could totally be signed before the draft. I put that percentage maybe at 15% right now as it stands. And trust me, I wouldn't mind the signing. I think that would be a low-level value move, especially if it ends up panning out. But now let's think about the running backs that you have in this class right now. And for the fact that Gus Edwards has been brought in, I said this to Dan during our running back rankings. I know everybody's got their favorite when it comes to their top running backs in this class, but because you now essentially have your staple RB1, again, this is going to be a running back by committee. This is not going to be one guy toting the rock, but because you're now going to go into a running back by committee, much like they did in Baltimore, this opens up so many other possibilities about A, what type of fit it could be, and B, when you could prioritize it in the draft. Because before free agency, before we knew that Gus Edwards was on this roster, people could talk about the Chargers selecting a running back in the second round, whoever it is that could possibly still be on the board. And now it's kind of simmered a little bit. But it's not a bad reason for why it's simmered, because I think that there are so many running backs in this class, whether we're talking about a Vidal, a Ray Davis, whoever it is that you want to select, that if we're talking about coming in here as part of a committee, that you could get something going with Edwards, insert your favorite running back, and Spiller.
Agreed. Sweet Jump says, I want a Dicker jersey or shirts. Good news. Put it in the chat. We've got a link to Big Dicker Energy, if you will, from LAFB. So go get one. Enjoy. Let's see. Someone was asking about like interest in trading for Brandon Ayuk. No.
I just don't think that's going to happen.
No. Obviously he's a good player. Like, obviously he's a Harbaugh type of player. Like that goes without saying. But they just got rid of 2 receivers who were making $30 million.
That's my thought. It's just like, why would you recycle that money for someone else while also having to give up draft capital to do it, as opposed to trading away Keenan Allen? Just a thought.
Yep. Jake, anything else? We've gone through a ton of these. We're a little over our time, but want to do this justice. Anything else you want to discuss?
19 days are going to be the longest 19 days of this entire year right now, because April 25th can't get here soon enough. It really can't. There's so many questions going into this. And as we get closer and closer and closer, and who knows if a trade's going to end up happening with the Chargers prior to the draft, the closer we get, it looks like it may just end up coming down to who's on the board and who's on the clock. And it's going to make the draft even more dramatic in that moment. But you got to be excited for this. Jim Harbaugh is the head coach of the Chargers. The front office is different. And I think you're going to see much more of a collective mindset when we're talking about the draft strategy. I've talked about examples of this. I think that Harbaugh is going to go to every single one of his position coaches and say, who do we need? Who is our guy? Jim Harbaugh is going to defer to them to make a collective decision.
Ortiz.
Yes.
Ortiz. Yeah.
So you know that the familiarity that Minter has with Ortiz being prior in the organization with Baltimore, he's going to have an ear there. He's going to go to every one of his other positional coaches and figure out for that position, what do we want to prioritize in every round? It's going to make this draft so exciting to watch.
Yes. ZX Zealot says, you guys live for the draft? We will be watching the draft. I think we're going to be doing something.
Something.
Stay tuned.
Alcohol will definitely be involved.
Absolutely.
That's for sure.
Dominic, speaking of alcohol, Dominic says the draft is like Christmas.
Damn right. It's Christmas and spring, baby.
Yes. This has been so much fun. We love doing these live shows. We'll be doing some more, obviously. Crazy turnout for this one on a random Saturday morning. Not much news out of Chargers camp, but all eyes are on the Chargers, the front office, the draft, free agency. They got phase 1 stuff happening next week. Big things happening for the Chargers. If you haven't already done so, please do us a favor. Hit that like and subscribe. Helps out a ton. Until next time, enjoy your weekend. I've finished my sparkler. Jake, are you still going with the energy drink?
Actually, I am, surprisingly. Normally, I finish one of these during a live broadcast. I'm actually only about halfway through. So I don't know if I'm proud of myself or if that is, I don't know what to think about that.
It means that they brought the energy for you. That's what it means. I'm going with that. For Jake Hefner, you can find him at Jake T. Hefner, myself at Dan W Sports on X. Find us anywhere you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, you name it. Enjoy your weekend. Be safe. Enjoy. And we'll talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed.